At the heart of Scrum is a Scrum team, and within a Scrum team, there is a product owner, a Scrum master, and developers. There are three artifacts in Scrum: product backlog, sprint backlog, and increment. And associated with each of those three artifacts are the commitments, the product goal, the sprint goal, and definition of done. And there are four other events: sprint planning, daily scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. So think of the sprint as a container of all these things, and then there are some guidelines on how these all fit together. The way I like to remember this is with the rule of 3, 4, and 3. 3 roles, 4 events, and 3 artifacts with 3 commitments. So let's start with the Scrum team. One of the roles in the Scrum team is product owner. The product owner is focused on quote-unquote what. What needs to be done? What is the most important thing? What is it that the customers want? What is it that the stakeholders want? What is going to maximize the return on investment? The next role in Scrum, the developers, they are focused on how much work to do in a sprint and how to do that work. So the product owner is focused on quote unquote what, and developers are focused on how much and how. The product owner wants to do the right thing, and developers want to do the thing right. And there is usually some sort of tension between them. So there is a third role of Scrum Master, and a Scrum Master is focused on how can I help my team move faster? What is getting in the way of the Scrum team in making progress that I can eliminate so that the team can move faster? The Scrum Master also coaches the product owner and the developers on how to work with each other. The Scrum Master is not a communication bottleneck. The first artifact in Scrum is a product backlog. It is maintained by the product owner, and it is nothing but a to-do list for the product, and it is ordered by business value. Associated with product backlog is a commitment, which is the product goal. The product goal is embedded within the product backlog, and it talks about the long-term goal for the product. Your sprint starts with a sprint planning event. That's the first thing that happens in the sprint. And the whole Scrum team, the product owner, Scrum Master, and developers, they all participate in the event. Product backlog is an input to the sprint planning event. At the end of sprint planning, the Scrum team knows why they're doing the sprint. They've decided what they will do in the sprint, and they've also decided how they will do that work. The why, the what, and the how is collectively captured in sprint backlog. That is the second artifact in Scrum. Associated with the sprint backlog is a commitment of sprint goal, the reason why you are doing the sprint. So of the two artifacts, the product backlog and the sprint backlog is created, owned, and maintained by the developers, and product backlog is created, owned, and maintained by the product owner. Sprint backlog, as the name suggests, lives for as long as the sprint lives, which means every sprint you create a new sprint backlog. And product backlog, as the name suggests, is associated with the product and lives for as long as the product lives. After sprint planning, the team starts doing the work. During the sprint, the developers meet daily to review the work that has been done so far towards the sprint goal and determine what they'll do in the next 24 hours. This event is run by the developers. It is for the developers. The Scrum Master attends for 3 reasons. First, to make sure the event is taking place. Second, to make sure that the time box is maintained. and third, to learn about the impediments. Scrum Guide is very silent about whether or not product owners should attend this event. I highly encourage product owners to attend this event. The reason is these 15 minutes that they spend with the Scrum team during the day is going to help them understand how the team is doing towards the sprint goal and also see early red flags. It improves collaboration and reduces the time that the product owner might spend in chasing down the developers on the Scrum team. As the work continues at the end of the sprint, all the work that's finished is collectively called an increment. That is a deliverable from the sprint. It's an outcome of the sprint, and it's the third artifact in Scrum. It is the responsibility of the Scrum team to make sure there is an increment ready for review at the end of the sprint. Most of the time, the developers would be doing the work towards creating the increment, but Scrum Master and Product Owner may also be contributing to it. Associated with the increment is definition of done, which is nothing but a quality statement. Every single thing that gets delivered in the increment has to meet the quality standard, which is defined by definition of done. The finished increment is showcased to the stakeholders in an event called Sprint Review. Product owners, Scrum Master, and developers, they participate in Sprint Review, and the increment is showcased to the stakeholders. Plus, if the team needs any help from the stakeholders, they talk about it. They also talk about the market, the release, the competition, and stakeholders provide feedback and help that the Scrum team needs. The feedback is usually captured in the product backlog. After the sprint review is the sprint retrospective. That's the fifth event in Scrum. And sprint retrospective is an inspect and adapt on individuals, interactions, processes, and tools. Sprint review is an inspect and adapt on the increment, on the product backlog, on the product goal sometimes, on the release plan. Whereas a retrospective is inspect and adapt on individuals, interactions, processes, and tools. This event is geared towards the Scrum team becoming better at what they do, and therefore stakeholders are not present during sprint retrospective. It is for the Scrum team, so product owners, Scrum Master, and developers participate in this event. During retrospective, the team takes up one or two action items for improvement in the next sprint. And after the retrospective, the team goes into the sprint planning for the next sprint. The action items sometimes are captured in the sprint backlog for next sprint. So if you are in retrospective of sprint 1, the improvement action items that the team takes up could be captured in the sprint backlog of sprint 2. There are a couple of other things that I want to talk about. One of them is a burn down chart, and this is something that the developers use for tracking their work. The other thing I want to talk about is product backlog refinement. If you notice, right after sprint retrospective is the sprint planning for next sprint. And product backlog is an input to sprint planning, which means the product backlog should be ready at that time. And in order to keep the product backlog ready, the team invests time during the sprint to refine the product backlog. Product backlog refinement is geared towards upcoming 2 or 3 sprints and is focused on keeping the product backlog ready, so that at the time of sprint planning, the team is able to plan the sprint quickly and move on to doing the work. So this is Scrum in a nutshell.